Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. Wanted to do a story on uranium, something I purchased way back in March 2020, because you got to stick with what you know. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS formula that I always aspire to, I think. I aspire to keep it simple, stupid. That's right. But just buying things when they're cheap, selling them when they're expensive. And at the time, uranium was really cheap. So we bought it, or I bought a lot of it. And it's turning out to be a good bet. But I think the question from here becomes, is uranium still cheap? And is it still something that you may consider buying or putting on a watch list? So what prompted me to really think this through and want to do a video on it is an article that just came out from CNBC. So let's dive over. There it is. Uranium stocks surge as investors bet on nuclear power amid a power crunch. So this is today, just came out 40 minutes ago. And I'm not sure how much uranium stocks are up. And for whatever reason, oh, here we go. This is so North Shore Global Uranium Mining ETF closed 5.5% higher. Let's see, Global X Uranium ETF closed 4.7%. And for whatever reason, this is behind CNBC's paywall, which there is absolutely no way that I pay for. Just on matter of principle alone, there is no way that I'm paying for anything that comes from CNBC. But let's fire over to the actual price of uranium. And you'll notice up 7.39%, 7.39% today. And this is a very difficult chart for me because I always talk about oil and buying that when it's cheap, selling it when it's expensive. And if you look at a long-term chart of oil adjusted for the price of inflation, it just, as soon as you see it, it's glaringly obvious when it becomes cheap under $30 a barrel and when it becomes expensive over 80. But with uranium, I mean, who on earth knows? We saw it run way up to $140 a barrel. I don't think this is adjusted for inflation, by the way. So this the price actually today could be quite a bit cheaper, because if you adjusted it for inflation, it would probably be around maybe 35-ish, something like that. And if you adjusted it for the legit inflation, it might even be lower than that. But I think this 140 is probably an anomaly, but we could see it potentially in the future. It's only an anomaly on the chart when we look backwards. And if you really think through the environment, as far as the narrative, the political narrative that we see today, not just in the United States, but globally, it's this huge push with climate change, ESG, electrification, driving electric cars. And that means in the future, if we move that direction, whether it's you like it or not, it means a lot more electricity. And we see places like California that have these rolling blackouts. It's basically turned into a third world country because they've completely divested of all electricity from power sources such as coal. And I believe they're now shutting down their last nuclear source of energy in California, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that because I'm definitely not an expert. But I remember reading something like that, where there's a lot of countries that are producing a lot more nuclear. In fact, we'll get into it in a moment here. But even some energy officials in Japan, of all places, had suggested that, hey, maybe we start looking at nuclear energy again. And it seems to me that uranium and the story of nuclear energy is very similar to a central bank digital currency, talking about the cerveza sickness back in January 2020, or maybe talking about I'm not sure if you're able to say this on YouTube, so we'll say the lab leak theory. It's all these things. When you start talking about them, you're labeled a conspiracy theorist or a tinfoil hatter, or that's never going to happen. And the mainstream media, or the people with the approved opinion, they look at you as though, oh, that's just ridiculous, and they don't even consider the idea. And sure enough, within 6 months, 9 months, a year time, now all of a sudden, all the approved people are talking about what you were talking about a year ago. And like I said, it was that way with central bank digital currencies. If you guys were following the George Gammon channel back then, or even if you weren't, I'm sure that you guys were thinking about Fed coin, or at least had considered it, where the mainstream media thought that was a topic not worthy of adult discussion, let alone debate. And we saw the same thing with the survey sickness in January 2020. I started talking about it. Hey, guys, maybe we got to look at this thing, this R naught value. It might be a pandemic, and that might prompt governments to go way overboard, and we may see martial law. Same pushback I got then. Oh, tinfoil hatter, conspiracy theorist. And sure enough, 3 months later, then now all of a sudden the entire world agrees, including CNBC, the World Economic Forum, the global elite, etc. And we saw the exact same thing with the lab hypothesis, I'll call it. You guys know what I'm referring to. And I was not the one that was talking about that, but a lot of people were. And they got completely dismissed. But yet, 6 months later, now all of a sudden, all the approved media outlets and approved people are talking about it as though they're the ones who are mentioning it for the first time. When in reality, the alternative media, we'll call it, on YouTube or other social media platforms, they had been talking about it months in advance, sometimes even years in advance, depending on the topic. And I think nuclear is that same thing. I mean, if you guys listen to my interviews with Rick Rule, going all the way back to 2020, I believe, is the first time I interviewed Rick, he was talking about uranium. And he said, listen, it's cheap. It's been cheap for a long time. I don't know when it's going to go back up in price. But if you are someone that believes that in the future, you're going to flip that light switch and the light bulb that's in your ceiling will actually turn on, then you have to also believe the price of uranium will go up. And that's kind of, I'm paraphrasing there, but that's kind of the way that Rick Rule described it. And sure enough, now the CNBC types and the Bloomberg types are coming in and agreeing with what Rick was pointing out, let's call it a year and a half ago, when back then they were most likely saying that he was a crackpot. Or even the environmentalists, a year and a half ago, they just completely dismissed nuclear as though it's not even an option. Now, all of a sudden, even the environmentalists in Europe, the people that could be part of that Davos crowd, I don't know. But those types of individuals, the people who are very well respected by the global elite and all of the institutions, the mainstream media, the blue check marks, if you will, they're even coming out and saying, hey, look at the energy crisis that we have in Europe. That's most likely going to spread all across the globe. And you've got two options. Either you fix that energy crisis by burning fossil fuels, or you figure out a way to increase the output of electricity. Well, right now, you're not going to do that with wind and solar. So what's the only other option? Uranium or nuclear. And so this article with CNBC is touching on that. And they're claiming that today's run up at 7-8% in the spot price is indicative of investors just kind of now figuring that out. I wouldn't go that far. I think they've been figuring this out for quite some time, but it's starting to really show up in the price. Does that mean uranium will continue to go up? I have no idea. I've absolutely no idea. And I don't suggest trying to answer that question. Whenever I'm investing, I never try to figure out the price direction. I only try to figure out if something is cheap or if it's expensive. Going back to this chart, I don't think we can tell that definitively like I could looking at a chart of oil adjusted for inflation. So then you have to take it the next step and start understanding the fundamentals at play. So I don't think this chart really gives us enough information or really any information to determine whether or not we should. I think it should be on a watch list for sure, but whether or not we should be buying now or waiting or waiting until the price goes down, wait until it gets cheaper, let's say. But even if you omit this chart, I think it's still something to consider, but you start to have to really you need to start digging through the fundamentals, the supply demand equation for uranium and what it's going to look like in the future. And I think there's an argument for uranium being cheap even at this price based on global macro. And this push that whether we like it or not, regardless of your opinion, that we're going to have from these politicians who are going to be spending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that are just printed up fugazis, whether it's a central bank digital currency turning bank reserves into dollars that circulate in the real economy, whether it's the Fed and the Treasury merging their balance sheet so they can go ahead and just send out checks and then they can back that up with assets because everyone has an account with the Fed or in this case, the Treasury. We just did a story on how Jerome Powell is the probability of him being reelected as Fed chair is dramatically decreased as of today because of his trades have been leaked by the media. And therefore, Lael Brainerd has a much higher probability of becoming Fed chair than she did just as of this morning. And if she's the Fed chair, and if you got her and Janet Yellen tag teaming the money printing, then you could see this Green New Deal go through very easily. And that who knows how many trillions of dollars that would who knows how many trillions of dollars would go into trying to transition the United States and Western economies from fossil fuel to a cleaner source of electricity. And most likely that's uranium. So these are all things that I'm considering. And I think it's something that you should consider as well if you're an investor and trying to figure out, what is cheap and what is expensive right now. Also, if you're someone that believes that we will most likely have a 1970s type of inflation where it's not transitory, it's more persistent, then you're going to want to have more of your portfolio allocated to hard assets, things that will hedge your purchasing power in terms of inflation. In other words, consumer prices going up in the future. So interesting stuff here. I think there's one other article I wanted to. Oh, yes. This is from Motley Fool. Why uranium stocks are on fire today. And the key points here: world's largest uranium producer is keen to buy loads of uranium from the spot market. Okay, this is another thing that I don't know. For me, I would never trade based on this information. But for you guys, maybe you have a different investment strategy. I think it's something you need to be aware of. And for most of you who follow uranium, you know that Sprott has been buying physical uranium, a lot of it. And that's really been one of the catalysts to this recent price rise. But it looks like Gazprom, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is starting to do the exact same thing. So, world's largest uranium producer, which I believe is Gazprom, is keen to buy loads of uranium from the spot market. So they're kind of hodling physical uranium, very similar to what Sprott's doing. With uranium production still capped, Gazprom's move could set off an unstoppable rally in uranium stocks. And again, I want to be very clear. I would not buy based on this because I'm not a short-term trader. I'm just someone that buys and holds, very rarely sells. But this is relevant news to the uranium market. So what happened specifically? Uranium stock sizzled Monday morning after huge development in the industry reignited heavy buying in stocks across the board. Here's how much some of the top performing uranium stocks had rallied at their high point on the day. Okay, one up 15, 9.5, 16.9, 8.6, Cameco up 8.4%. So now they talk about how this is a result of not only what Gazprom is doing, but also how they're kind of piggybacking on what Sprott started doing either a month or a couple months ago, where they were buying physical uranium and now they're just hodling it. So I'm not going to go over the whole article, but that gives you an idea of kind of what's happening in one of the markets that I've been paying a lot of attention to in the past, and I will be paying even more attention to in the future, because although I bought a lot back in March of 2020, I've still got it on a watch list, and I think that we're in a very long-term super cycle with commodities increasing in price. Gold, I think, or excuse me, oil is getting a little bit expensive. So if I could parlay or allocate some more of my portfolio to a commodity that is a little cheaper, that could be something I do in the future. I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm just letting you know kind of my thoughts out loud as far as my current strategy and what I may be employing sometime down the road. And when I do, obviously, I'll let you guys know. Okay, we've got a couple super chats here. Have you watched Kirk Sorensen's TED Talk on thorium? No, no, but I know Chris McIntosh is one of my partners in Rebel Capitalist Pro, and he's a hedge fund manager. It's his job to have his finger on the pulse of what's going on with all commodities. And he has been on this commodity story for a long, long time. So I kind of defer to him when I'm looking at ideas like thorium. And the way Chris looks at it is it's a startup. It's just like you're looking at a company, and are you an angel investor? If so, you might want to look at thorium. He's not an angel investor, nor am I. I like buying stuff like a old school McDonald's that is proven, and it's something that has been in high demand in the past and will most likely be in high demand in the future. And it will actually, where there's an infrastructure set up to where there's profit potential, existing profit potential, and future. It's not really a roll of the dice. So again, it's the difference between kind of angel investing and more so private equity. And I'm more of a private equity guy. So I'm not saying that thorium isn't worth considering, but I think it's more of a roll of the dice where I'd rather focus on something that currently exists that I know will most likely be in high demand in the future. What websites do I use to invest? Oh, what brokerage? I have TD Ameritrade, but that's just because I'm too lazy to get an interactive broker account. So this is a topic that comes up in Rebel Capitalist Pro all the time. And the members ask Lynn Alden this and Chris McIntosh. And whenever they're asked this question, they always respond with interactive brokers. So that's what I would suggest. Okay, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Make sure you continue to stand up, fight for freedom, liberty, and free market.